welcome to another episode of the Local Marketing Beat, brought to you by Overall. My name is Christian Hustle, and I'm thrilled that you're tuning into this episode. Certainly, AI gave us a very interesting 2025. No joke, everything has changed. AI is here, right? We're in it. But I think 2026 is going to be a wild ride for AI search. A lot of things changed last year, and we're not expecting this to stop anytime soon, which is why we're talking about generative AI and how is it rewriting local SEO. We're diving into schema, attribution, and what brands should be really thinking about to be at the top of their game. And for that, we're being joined today by James, who is a co-founder of Hocking Digital. They are the developers of GetHard, the GEO analytics and tracking tool. And for the last 20 years, he's worked in software, data, and AI engineering before starting his company in 2023. Welcome to the show, James. I'm very excited to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Sorry.
So as you were saying, I mean, you obviously come from tech and software, right? You mentioned a company earlier that you're working for out here in Texas, right? You used to be a neighbor, probably not at the same time. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how did you get into tech to begin with? I mean, 20 years ago was probably different than how it is today.
Yeah. So I actually started at a very young age. So I think as a 6-year-old, my brother and I, my parents probably didn't really know what to do with us in a positive way. They were running their own business, going to work. So they gave us a computer. And I have to say, I'm old enough to say this predated PCs and things like that. And we kind of learned to program, and it kind of stuck. So when I eventually went to university, kind of desire to learn more within that space kind of grew. And so by the late 90s, I had an opportunity to do, as part of my degree, a year out in industry. And, you know, Berners-Lee had invented the browser and stuff like that, but people were kind of not really sure what the internet was. And so I managed to have a year in industry working for a very large, now Fortune 100 company, and started building out the internet and got into internet that way. So when I came back to university, I actually really got into data, and I built my first neural network at that point. So in the late 90s, I built neural network. At that time, it wasn't that cool, you know, everyone is statistics and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But now it's like uber cool. And so I then went into a corporate role, and along the way, I dabbled and wanted to do something kind of entrepreneurial, but I stayed with the technology, stayed with data. And then in around 2018, I kind of thought machine learning was really going to kick off. I got into machine learning, and then from there pivoted into the role I'm in now. But I always came from I guess for the last 25 years, all that tech and stuff I did was for marketing teams. I was working with SEOs, working with marketing teams to understand their stuff. So I got into tech from the very beginning and stayed with it. So yeah, I'm a full-on tech kind of geek in a way, if that's right to describe.
That's awesome. And which is what brings us here today, right? Talking about machine learnings, LLMs. And I know you gave a presentation recently at Brighton SEO. Why don't we talk a little bit about what did you learn as you were preparing for your presentation that maybe SEOs are misunderstanding about LLMs and how they weight their sources?
It's a good question, because I think since Google, you know, for the last 20 years, we've been tracking an index.
Right.
So how do I rank in that index? And it's a fairly static thing, where around when what has now become generative AI, the underlying technology, when it went from theory, became published around 2019, then there was kind of commercial versions around 2022. I was working in this role where I was able to lead a team to let's dive into this and how can we use this technology. And at that point, I kind of worked out, wow, I think this could be a salesperson when you interact with it, very personal.
Right.
Now, when I went back and started talking with SEO people at the time, I think because we've got this collectively, we've got this way, this is how we kind of do outreach with people. This is how we do SEO. We kind of have evergreen pages. We do certain things. You can have programmatic SEO and stuff like that. I think also at that time or up to this point, PR teams, maybe performance marketing teams weren't so worried about how SEO worked because they were always focused on the conversion how do I track that conversion within a CRM? PR teams would be talking about how is the advertising on point brand, how is salespeople talking about the brand. And I think where things changed is now when I started positing a couple of years ago that actually schema would be really important, I had people pushing back because it says, well, no,
of course.
I've got it doesn't really shift the index that whole lot.
Right.
But because I was coming at it, I didn't come at from an SEO perspective. I was coming at from data science kind of technology perspective. Like, how does a machine read your site? And what I found was, I think for the SEOs, I think the challenge was that when you think about an index, you're thinking about one thing, and that's good. And the challenge is with large language models is their architecture isn't just a large language model. It's actually 3 or 4 different layers that come together, and that's the thing you interact with. And then the same again, if you go to a .com, whether it's like Google or ChatGPT, and you're interacting with that large language model, you're not actually interacting directly with the model. You're interacting with a website that's then communicating as a proxy. And I think back to your point about the SEO, I think the challenge is now you're no longer interacting with a single index, you're now interacting with multiple parts.
Right.
And similarly, I think the other challenge is that the inner bit, the large language model, it doesn't know anything about SEO. It doesn't know anything about ranking. It doesn't really care about the web. But it's a language model. So its goal in life is to interpret inputted text and give you a summary or a sequence that you ask for. And so that's why it then becomes, how do I interact with that? Where with an index, you're interacting with a fairly static thing. So I think from a knowledge perspective, how we tracked KPIs with an index, now that mind shift has to shift. And I think we're seeing that now. So for example, when these tracking tools first came out, people would do brand tracking. And that was a good starting point. And I think that was a very safe place because it kind of fitted with that index perspective. Am I ranking? Is my site ranking? Is my brand ranking? But the problem is that the models are not static like an index. So I think that it requires a mental shift to get to a place where actually you're now dealing with something that's undeterministic. And maybe whilst brand tracking is important, I think there's something else that has to be done in addition to.
And I think that it's also important to, like you said, right, understand that it's static, right? It's different. The goal, as we're talking about it, right, the goal is no longer to rank, because I mean this interactive websites powered by AI and LLM, there's no ranking, right? So it's a more complex thing. They're looking at a lot of other things, like you said, multiple layers. And now I believe that you saw some behavior change also depending on device and location. So what have you noticed there, for example, for multi-location brands? How can they adopt? Like, is there any specifics that you've seen in your research that comes down to what device is the person using versus where they located, US versus Europe, for example?
Absolutely. I mean, even before we kind of got into analyzing large language models, the work I did for marketing teams, we knew that if you try to take data collected for French usage, for example, just to randomly choose a country and compare it with the US, you would actually get a very poor analysis, because the way people in one country choose to buy and sell and things like that is different from another country, and we knew those gaps existed, or those differences existed, I should say. I think 2 years ago, when I first got into doing this analysis, we were bundling everything all together. But what I found was, through our own analysis, and as you mentioned, we actually saw there is a disparity. So even the time of day when the large language model will choose to ground itself and do a web search, is the data that we've identified is that it tends to align very closely with how the demographic and the geography works. So for example, we've got data that if you're looking for consumer clothing in the USA, you're unlikely to get the AI. The AI is unlikely to do any search of the internet to support its answer at 1 a.m. in the morning, for example.
Okay.
However, if you could go around to like 3 in the afternoon through to 6, 7 p.m., And again, it's clever enough to the large language model isn't clever enough, but the bit that wraps around it is clever enough to know that if you're on the eastern seaboard in New York, then your time zone is between this. But if you were, say, on the Pacific coast, it would be 3 hours later. So you might be doing your search at 8 a.m. and it's still 5 a.m. in Palo Alto, for example.
Right.
So at 5 a.m. I'm probably not going to do a web search, but at 8 a.m. I will. So, and we're starting to see that even more with our data, where now that ChatGPT and Google are including local. So local SEO is becoming even more and more local search results becoming more prominent in the output. So now you're getting maps and stuff like that injected. And so, when you start tracking is no longer good enough to just say track the world or track a country, because you can get the results for a business within Arizona will be different from someone in, say, New Jersey. So we're seeing that these .coms that wrap the large language models is actually doing something over and above just for summarizing the results. It is making very local specific searches.
When you mentioned that the time changes and it's conscious of time zones and the user activity, is there any way that we can use that to our advantage, like when it comes to content publishing or refresh cadence, like to stay on top of mind of these AI tools?
So I think in order to answer that, I think from an architecture perspective, so at the very core, you've got the large language model. If you took the output of what you and I talk about here and put it into a large language model, say, can you summarize, the podcast? That's what the LLM does. But the bit to search the web is kind of separate. So no one will really know what's in that black box. What we see is there's certain things that suggest that while we know confidently that different service providers like ChatGPT use either Bing or Google.com to get their grounded information, their web searches. I certainly know Black Friday that we just went, ChatGPT was giving me very up-to-date responses, but wasn't using any cited sources. So that tells me that they're building their own index. So to your question, I think it's quite a difficult one to know. You still want to be in that ranking in the results page, but the way it appears the large language model is searching is in a local specific sense. So I think as a business, you can continue. What I would recommend is you carry on the practices that you're doing right now. So making sure that your web page is structured in a very good way. The large language model, or the bit around it that goes off and does the web searches and looks at the individual pages that are recommended by the index, it's one of the features it's looking at is the how up to date is the content. So you could have the best evergreen content in the world, but if the page doesn't reflect that you've assessed it within recent time, you'll probably not get used by the AI at all, even though what you've written on your page is perfect.
Yeah, I mean, it could be the best blog, but it hasn't been touched in 10 years, right? Yeah. Now, you bring a very good point, right? Because we're talking about rankings and how brands were used to, that was our goal, right? Like just get to position number one.
Yeah.
Now, what happens if, maybe it will happen sooner rather than later, maybe it will not, but what if Google just removes the traditional blue links from search, right? And now it's all AI. How should brands think about schema or internal linking to become discoverable by these AI and LLM models?
Internal linking is an interesting one.
It is, yeah. I want to hear your opinion on it.
Okay, it really depends which index the large language model uses to ground itself. And when I say ground itself, what I mean is it's going off to an external source to verify what it's going to respond with, and whether it's using its own index or another index. And when that index is created, what does it consider pertinent? Is internal linking relevant? Because the large language model does not care about internal linking, I can guarantee that. So what it does, it will go off. It's got an orchestrator that sits around it. It will go off and it will, if there's like 100 results returned from the index, it will go and look at every single one.
Yeah.
And it will then look at, it will then go through a series of tasks where it decide, is the page that it's reading contextually relevant? Is the information on the page in a form that I can use? And things like that, and how is it up to date to this? And my thesis is that these vendors of these LLMs, they want to be the place you go to, so they want to provide the best answer. And so so structure is important, because you've got a machine reading your website, and these machines don't care about persuasive copy or anything like that. They just say, can I use it to answer the question that I've been asked? Right. And when you're trying to think, how do I structure my site? Make sure your site is as easily machine readable as possible. Mm-hmm. If there's internal linking, does it matter? Not to the large language model, but it still really matters to the index. So this is why you can't dismiss one for the other. I got one question where someone says, well, maybe I should get rid of my evergreen content and just focus on the right now. The downside with focusing on the right now is that large language models, they're trained all the time, but training is a really expensive task. And so the information the large language model will use tends to be built up over years. So this is why if you go and ask it a question that doesn't prompt it to go and ground itself, you'll get something that may be 2 or 3 years out of date.
Right, I've seen that.
So you still need that content on your site to be part of that training process, but you still need to have other content which is up to date and to the point. And it's a bit like when Google used to put those sound bites at the top of a page that was trying to answer people, the first iteration of zero click. You're kind of doing that. So if you have good structure, try to answer the question that you think has been posted. I would definitely look at the also asked questions that have been posted on these tools. But the main difference, I think, is that with an index, it looked at your site, decided how relevant you were, how many internal links did you have, how many external links did you have, and that got you good ranking. Now the AIs it's more about, one, you need to do that, but the AI is now saying, given this question, and what is the question people are asking, do you have, in a very clean and easy way, I can just lift it from your page and put in a response. So this isn't about just dumping FAQs on your page, unfortunately. No. that worked for a very short period of time, but it's about.
I wish it was that simple.
Yeah, if I was someone, it's about your brand or your message being repeated in lots of different places by lots of different people. And so that's the equivalent of internal linking, that you are SEO everywhere in a sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And to summarize a couple of things that you just said, right? Because I've seen it where, how the Google bot would crawl through internal linking to find pages. And if they're not linked, they don't find it. Versus you go on ChatGPT and you search for something and you can see the count, how many pages it goes per second, right? When I ask for something, it's like, I just read 500 pages. Here's your answer. It's like, that would have taken me days, right? It's like, or maybe even I would probably quit after 5 pages. And to your point also with Evergreen, because I think Evergreen is a really good point, that, if it's easy to think, like, if LLMs want easy, concise information, then my Evergreen content is useless. But it's not, right? That's your authority. That's how the LLMs know that you know your stuff or not, right? So, to summarize this, what we're talking about with Evergreen content, right? That, people would think, hey, let's just scratch it, right? That's not what LLMs want. Well, that's part of your authority. That's what really showcases what the brand knows. But at the same time, you do gotta provide that schema and concise answer at the same time. Now, if you had to give one tip, right, out of everything that we've talked about, what is it that brands can do, short, in this short time frame that could have high impact, that they should really think about when it comes to get found and get recommended by LLMs? Think about ChatGPT, Gemini, AI overviews. What would be your number one recommendation?
So number one, it would be, look at what questions are people actually asking for your brand.
I think that's a goldmine on its own. Yeah.
And it really depends what you're selling and who's buying from you and where do these people hang out. So if your customers are on Reddit, go to Reddit. Reddit will actually, if you click on a subreddit and click on a topic, it will tell you other topics. So they've got the also ask going on.
Yeah.
If it's not on Reddit, go somewhere else. Look at Google or so else. I wouldn't spend too much time worrying, is it a long question or a short question? These, for me, are a goldmine.
Yes.
If I was to offer two more, make sure your site is clean, compliant, has good markup. These AIs will, and no JavaScript. So your content should be server-side rendered, and it should be in HTML form on the site. They won't put any effort into trying to wait for a response. And then the third one is make sure you're ranking well in Bing, because while these tools will search lots of sites, you still need to be within like page 1, page 2, the top 100, results. In fact, these AIs won't even page on the search results, so you have to be on the first page.
Right.
Whilst they build their own index. So I know you asked for one, those are three.
No, I love it. Yeah. I mean, 3 is better than 1, right? But at least the question was 1, you got us 3. And I think they're very valuable. I think there's a lot that brands can take away from this episode. Hopefully they have some homework just by listening to you and your insights that you shared today. Drop it in the comments. Let us know, what are your weaknesses, right? What are those opportunities? Like you said, I wish it was as easy as just dump FAQs in there. It's not a one scratch it off the list and you're done, but they are important. They are helping tremendously, along with everything else, right? It's just kind of like old school SEO, right? It's, you got to do it all, not just pick one and stick with it. Like it's really a recipe, and you need all the ingredients to make this work. So anyway, I really want to thank you, James, for your time today. You had valuable insights. How can people connect with you if they want to learn more about you, what you're working on, your research, etc.? How can they follow you or connect with you?
Probably easiest is our website, getheard.online. On LinkedIn, of course, you can find me, James Hocking, on LinkedIn. And again, it will say Get Heard. And there's a newsletter that we publish there. But again, if you come to getheard.online, you'll see our latest updates and some of the cool stuff we're building. We're more than a brand tracker. We're actually trying to answer the fundamental question about why was I surfaced, why was I not surfaced, and what can I do about it. So that's what we work on.
Fun fact, that's how I started with SEO. Is like, why am I ranking, or why am I not ranking? That's how I started, and I got hooked. So it sounds like the game's repeating itself. But anyway, thank you, James, and thank you, everybody, for watching. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. And if you haven't checked out the Overall Academy, go check it out. We have free certifications and courses on GEO, LPO, and everything search. With that, I'll see you on the next episode. Bye-bye.
Thank you.